Stephen Randolph. I'm the Chief Architect at realMethods, and today's presentation is about the orb that we created for CircleCI. Before I get into the orb, I think it'd be helpful to talk a little bit, just a minute or two, the background about realMethods, and it will give some context for the purpose of the orb itself. How we got started was as a consulting company doing work, different domains, different institutions, but fundamentally, um, the work we were doing had often the same development objectives, same tech stacks, same languages, etc. But what was different was the domain itself, right? The actual business context by which we were actually building things. So, being decent developers, we thought it would be interesting to sort of try to encapsulate that into an actual product itself. So why we built realMethods is we wanted to be able to turn business models into applications, right? So if we could determine how to define technology stacks, templatize them, and keep them separate from the models themselves, then we could actually merge any model with any technology stack and come up with a resulting application. So whenever I talk about generating an application, you need to think about, our goal is to generate as much as we possibly can. Every configuration file, every line of code that we can, based on how much we can deduce from a business model. And business models for us come in a few different forms. It could be in a UML, could be in a well-structured JSON file, could be us reverse engineering out of a jar file with plain old Java objects. It could be a SQL script, and there's a couple other formats that we support as well. So that's really what we're talking about here when we talk about an orb. When you think about the state of the tool chain and some of the phases in there, there's others often, but these are the traditional ones in terms of how we think about going from planning to running in this sequence of steps that are in between. These are some of the common players that sit within those particular phases themselves. When you think about realMethods in this orb itself, the goal is to sort of introduce between planning and the actual building out phase, how much can we generate? And that's sort of this new phase we're talking about here. This generation phase and continuously being able to generate really the core services. If something in the model changes, can we look at what changed and reflect that back into the core services? Core services, you can view those as the RESTful APIs, the serverless functions, those sorts of things that are traditionally core to any application. CRUD capabilities, but much more than that as well. So CircleCI today, this should be familiar to you in terms of the objective of this diagram is to sort of take you from being integrated with your source control system, it through a webhook or some other means, being able to notify the platform, the CircleCI platform, go ahead, get your testing done, notifications, and automatically getting your applications deployed. So this should be familiar too. But the requirement is that you obviously need to have something in the source control repository for this to all take place. So where we fit in is being able to get that first commit in there. Our goal is that, we're going to try to make your first commit your best commit, being able to commit really a fully functional application that can be automatically pushed to your repository of choice, being able to automatically be spun up on CircleCI, and that whole pipeline and process takes place as you're used to. So let's take a look a little bit about the orb itself. The orb, it actually is something you can use any other orb. There's links, and I'll give you a link at the end of this so you can see what this orb looks like, its instructions, etc. But it's a standard orb. There's nothing unique about it in terms of its structure, but what it does is probably certainly unique. What you're going to be doing is committing, your config.yaml where you'd actually have this orb being utilized, within a repository. And then you're also going to have some standard input files that we need to read so we can generate the application. I'll step through a few of those in a second, but I just wanted to take you through this right now. And when those are read, the orb itself is going to then go ahead and pull in those input files, and it's going to call the realMethods backend to actually generate the application. And part of the application, as I mentioned, is to be able to take all the code and all those files, everything that's generated, and push it to the repository that you specify as part of those input parameters. And then from there, if you actually had a pipeline, on CircleCI, listening for that particular repository to have code, you know, committed to it, part of what we commit would be a config.yaml as well for that particular application. And then it would, of course, be read, and it would be executed so you could build, test, and deploy that application. So, this is really one way to start to think about, how do we stand up, the first pass of our application. So from, understanding what we're generating, you would then know what are you building upon. So let me take us out of here for a second and just bear with me, if you would. I'll share this later on so you can understand what links to take a look at. What I wanted to do is I want to show you first a sample config.yaml. We have a public repository up on GitHub where you can pull down the entire project, and you can make modifications that suit your needs, and then you can push it to your own repo and do a build that way. But this is a sample config.yaml, and what it contains is an API token, so we know it's you if you want to use a unique one, but you could use this one if you needed to because it is unique for anybody who's a CircleCI user. So we know you are authorized against the backend to actually make these calls. And it's really just these 4 lines of execution, right? You're making the call to the orb itself, to asking it to generate an app, and you're passing in 4 parameters. You're telling it the name of the generation YAML file that contains some directives. I'll show you that in a second. You're passing in another YAML file that contains your Git configurations, your repo name, user ID, password, the server URL, bitbucket.org or whatever that happens to be. The application options itself, I'll show you an example of that. And then the model identifier. In this case, the model that we're using is a UML XML file that contains, the actual business objects themselves. You think about things like a customer and an account, address, etc. Those sorts of things and their relationships and their data. Those are the types of things that we would need to see that have context as it relates to your application. So this is just a sample JSON file that contains the application options, and as you can see, things like application name, description, who the author is, etc. Those sorts of things are in here. If you were using JFrog, for instance, as a repository for your binaries, if you provide those as well, we could, push those up to JFrog Artifactory. So, the JSON file that contains your options is something to take a look at. But for the sake of demonstration, you certainly could leave these as they are for your first pass. This particular YAML file is sort of the generation directives. It's telling the backend what's the name of the tech stack that we want to use. It's passing in a model identifier, but because we're passing it in as an input parameter, this is going to get ignored. And again, it's going to use the name of the file, the model file that I'm passing in. If I wanted to include the name of the options file, the JSON file, this one here, I could do that here, but again, we're passing it as a command line argument just for demonstration purposes. And this is the actual name of the entry within the YAML file that's going to tell us, what are the Git parameters that we need to provide. Again, if we pass it in as an argument, this particular parameter is going to be ignored. And what's most important is for you to take a look at, and the only thing you really need to change is this particular entry, right? So again, we're gonna build a Django application. I'm using our public repository parameters here, and I'm actually going to push it to a repo that I've already created that has this name, and it's going to be up on Bitbucket. So let me go here first to sort of show that we have that, and this is again Django orb demo 01 is the name of the repo. Let me take a look at something here. I think it's actually being created as a public repo. Let me see if I can make a private repo. Let me make that public for the sake of this demonstration. Excellent. Okay, and then I'm going to literally push this config.yaml that's going to cause the orb to be executed, and we're going to see all this code get generated, and we're going to see the config.yaml get pushed up to the Bitbucket repo, and then we're going to see CircleCI recognize it and build out the whole project. So there's a lot going on here. You're better off playing with it on your own, because sometimes talking through these things is a little bit much. So let me go ahead and push this up there to make all this take place here. Okay, great. So that's going to go ahead and commit all that. And then what we can do is come over here, and the first thing that we're going to do is on CircleCI is actually have the orb itself get executed. So hopefully it'll recognize that that config.yaml got pushed up there, and it's going to cause it to go ahead and create a build on our behalf. Let's see what's going on here. Excellent. So we have it running right now. What this is doing is, again, it's taking the config files, all those options, and it's going to go ahead, talk to the realMethods backend, generate the application, and it's going to push it up to our repo up on Bitbucket. So let's go ahead and see what this thing looks like. Let me click on this, and we see it's executing. It's sitting there running. It's generating the application on a remote server, and as soon as that is done, we can go ahead and check and see that the code got checked in. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like over here. Excellent. So 2 seconds ago. So this was all checked in. We're going to have a config.yaml over here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to log out because I'm logged in into my GitHub parameters. I'm going to log back in with my Bitbucket parameters, and I should see that this project is something I can create a build on. Let me go ahead and log in here with Bitbucket, and I should be able to see this project here. It's public, and there it is. Let's go ahead and set this project up. And let's see if we can stop building. Excellent. So let's go ahead and let this thing do what it does. And it's going to go ahead and it's going to create up the entire environment for us, right? So I did nothing more than just tell it what I want, what tech stack I wanted to use. And again, we're using a Django tech stack. So it's going to go ahead and create the application, install everything it needs. It's going to go ahead and run a test, post that test so we can see those test results, and you're done. And that's a full-blown application. We saw the test results have been uploaded. It had artifacts that it uploaded. It ran the tests. It had 13 tests because it had 13 business objects. Here are some of them: activity test, admin test, an answer, comment, question group. Those are the entities from the object, from that object model that turned into actual code on the back end here, right? So there's going to be a whole UI for it and all the ability to persist it. That was a lot, and that was a short period of time. But once you get comfortable with that whole process of modeling, you probably already have models. And again, SQL script is a model. We can import that, and we can deduce what we need to from there. Creating a JSON file is not much. We have documentation on what that needs to look like from a format perspective. If you're comfortable using UML or even the Eclipse modeling framework, you certainly can do that, and that would allow you to quickly stand up a model, select the tech stack you want, make modifications to those input options, make sure you're pushing it to your repo with your credentials, and you're all set. So, we'll have more on this, more series on talking about this in a more involved way. But this is definitely a good way to get started, and I hope that you found this helpful. And again, my name is Steve Randolph, and I'm talking to you from Real Methods. You guys have a great day.